Hey, Voodoo Power listeners. Before we start the show, let me tell you about Strength Coach Pro. Strength Coach Pro is the ultimate coaching companion for passionate strength coaches. Strength Coach Pro is a powerful platform allowing coaches to sequence programs for an entire year, ensuring athletes stay on track. It features a simple drag and drop design for program building. It's easy and efficient, allowing for customized workouts. Another great feature of Strength Coach Pro is the real-time leaderboard feedback. Athletes love competition, creating a fun, engaged, and motivated environment where they can thrive. Strength Coach Pro is trusted by coaches at all levels, from professional to D1, high school, and professional trainers looking for an easy way to streamline programming needs. Whether working with 10 clients or 1,000 athletes, there are no limits to the support of this program. In addition, there's a 14-day trial for coaches where they can explore the platform for themselves. At just $50 a month or $500 a year, the value is unbeatable. Please don't miss your opportunity. Coaches can reach out to Strength Coach Pro for a demo today. Let them work to save you time and elevate your coaching. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Michael Brinson. Coach Brinson is entering his fourth season as the head strength conditioning coach for Jackson Academy Athletics. Prior to Jackson Academy, Coach Brinson served as strength conditioning coach for the U.S. Army 82nd Airborne Division. He also spent 2 seasons at the University of Missouri as the Associate Director of Football Athletic Performance. Before Missouri, Coach Brinson was an assistant strength and conditioning coach for Liberty University football team, the University of Kansas football team, and Southern Miss football and track and field program. He played offensive lineman at Southern Miss from 2011 to 2014, where he received his bachelor's in exercise science and a master's in sports coaching. Coach Brinson is a certified strength conditioning coach through NSCA. He's a Jackson native, attended University Christian School, where he played football and ran track. Coach Brinson received the NHSSCA Mississippi State Coach of the Year. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there's a few things to kind of kick off before we get too deep into this. One, congratulations, you just had a new baby. Are you getting some sleep?
We are getting better. We had her last Wednesday, so she's a little over a week old. First couple nights were rough. We've gotten her to the point where when we want to go to bed, get her fed, she will sleep, and then about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, things start getting exciting again. So, but we are improving.
Yeah, it's always a tough transition at first, and then once they sleep through the night, things get a little bit better.
Yeah.
The other thing I saw, and when I was building this bio, I kind of wondered how this shook out. So you were at the University of Kansas, and then you went to the University of Missouri. So you got to see both sides of the rivalry. How was that?
It's interesting because, I think back in the day, that was a really heated rivalry, and I don't remember the last time they played each other in football. And so none of the kids at Kansas cared about it, and then none of the kids at Missouri cared about it. It seemed like it was just the fans that cared about it. Of course, they go back and forth, on social media and online and everything, but the kids are really unaware of it. I don't think I realized how big of a deal it used to be until I got to Missouri. And, just when you get there, everybody's excited about you, your new coach and everything. And people are talking. Then when they ask where you're coming from, and you say, well, I was at Liberty, and okay, well, where were you before that? I was at Kansas. And then their, entire demeanor changes. From what I was told, it was a really good rivalry in football. Maybe it's something they bring back. Rivalries are good. It makes the mundane day-to-day stuff more exciting when you've got, big games to look forward to. But, two very different places, very different towns. I can see why they don't like each other.
I have a really good friend. He cooks for the football team a couple times a year. So he always keeps up with everything that's going on over there. So if you ever had any butthead barbecue while you were a coach there, that's one of my really good friends.
Okay. Yeah. I think I did.
While you were there, did you work with Brian Mann? I don't know the exact year, so I don't know where the overlap.
No, he was not there anymore. That was under Pat Ivy, I believe. And I think he was already in Miami by the time I got to Missouri.
Okay. Well, there's quite a bit of your background, so now we can jump into some of your training and what you're doing there. So me and you had discussed this week and kind of built some notes and different ideas on some good conversation. But you're the first strength coach in your school's history. So what made them decide that they wanted to move in this direction?
One of the, the state of Mississippi is behind in a lot of ways, and from the rest of the country. And the surrounding states, especially when you get into like Alabama and Georgia, have got, for the most part, a lot of strength and conditioning coaches in the high school setting. Mississippi does not, especially in the private school, which is, I work at a private school. One of the biggest rivals to Jackson Academy has had a strength coach. I believe he's starting, I think Georgia's starting year 7 or year 8. So he had been at Jackson Academy, or excuse me, at MRA and established MRA for a while. And I think, the administrators and the parents and the coaches were seeing some of the benefits that they were getting and wanted more of the same for JA. The fact that I got it, it was just certain dominoes had to fall. I was at Fort Bragg at the time, and I'd actually accepted a tactical job, a special Air Force Special Forces tactical job down in Florida, and I was getting ready to go there. And I got a call from my former boss at Kansas, Missouri, and Southern Miss, Zach Woodfin, that, one of his good friends that he had made in Hattiesburg, who was not a board member, but an influential person at JA, had reached out to him that Jackson Academy was going to go down this road and they wanted to add a strength coach. And, did he know or recommend anybody? And he recommended me, me being from the area, and I'd worked for him for quite a few years. Got a phone call from them, interviewed, and then started about a month later.
So let me ask you this, because this I think is a unique challenge that you probably had to face. You were getting ready to work with an elite mindset, the best of the best in the military. Mm-hmm. You take that, you kind of push that to the side, and you go work with junior high school kids. How did you have to change to adapt to that new environment? Well,
I think for me, it was, I'm more comfortable with athletes than I am tactical populations, just because, that's what I know. I've been in sports my whole life, played collegiately. As soon as I got done playing, I got into coaching. That's what I'm familiar with. That's what I know. So it was more of the same in a way. Going from the SEC to tactical was a huge shock for me. The tactical population, obviously I was around some of the, absolute elite in the world with the 82nd Airborne. They are absolutely the best of the best at what they do, which is jumping out of planes with, hundreds of pounds of gear on them into a hostile environment and going directly into combat. That's stuff that the average person can't even get their head around. But when it comes to training, when it comes to athleticism, 90% of them are absolutely average, because that's not what they are. They've never trained. They're regular people who, chose to serve our country, defend our country, and fight for our country. And they've been trained to do that job by the best in the world. And so they're really good at one thing, but they're absolute novices at what we do. So that was, I think, being in that setting was beneficial in a way, because when you're dealing with 7th grade athletes, they're obviously absolute novices at everything as well. So I think it was preparing me for this in a way, and there were things I was not ready for. I shouldn't say not ready for, that I wasn't anticipating once I got to Jackson Academy. Some of the things I knew were going to be challenging, I didn't give enough credit to how challenging they would be. And then some of the things that I thought would be an issue, not an issue, but a difficulty in navigating, were not a problem at all. I did not anticipate how much extra training and athletics some of these kids are going to do outside of JA athletics. I didn't know travel football was a thing. Travel football was not a thing when I was in high school. Now it's a thing. So you've got seventh, eighth, and ninth graders who are going to play a football game for the school on Monday night or Thursday night, and then they're going to go play another football game for a travel football team on Saturday, and they may play another one on Sunday. So I didn't go into it realize how much extra physical demands are on these kids. I didn't realize how involved some of the parents would be, and that's nothing new. Parents have been really involved with their kids' athletic careers, for a really long time. But when you've got, like I said, seventh, eighth, and ninth grade parents who, think their kid's the next Nolan Ryan, and you've got to pump the brakes for them a little bit. That was something that I didn't anticipate being as big of a deal as it was. But, stepping into it, it was really a blank slate. Football had a strength coach prior to me. It was one of the position coaches, and he had been there a long time, and he did a good job. He would be the first one to admit he is not a strength coach. This was not something he ever wanted to do, but he was just given this responsibility a long time ago, and he did the best that he could with it, and he did do the best that he could with it. I was pretty shocked at how well the varsity guys moved and trained coming in, because he did do as good of a job as he could. The rest of the kids did not have that. It was really a blank slate, and I was able to essentially create it exactly how I wanted to create it. People that I know that ask, what is it like going into a high school setting or a middle school setting? I tell them, you need to have as airtight a plan as possible, because the challenges and the logistics and the scheduling and the flow of training, all of those things are going to be the most important factor. And if you don't have a really, really solid plan that's very adjustable, very flexible, that like the back of your hand, you're not going to be successful, because you're going to have, orthodontist appointments. You're going to have tutoring appointments. You're going to have kids that, it's a Friday and you're supposed to have, a heavy lower body session. They're telling you they've got a travel soccer game the next day, and their coach doesn't want them to train. You're going to have kids that show up at random that you've never seen, ever heard of before, and you've got to figure out a way to make it work. They can't just stand there in the corner, and then you can't just throw them into the lift with everybody else. You're going to have adjustments day to day that you would never have at the collegiate setting. There's positives in the high school and the middle school setting that are also not present, especially now in the collegiate world with the transfer portal and NIL, that coaches at the college level would be really jealous of those of us who are in the high school setting. My seventh, eighth, and ninth grade kids, I see every day, Monday through Friday. I get them every single day. Young men especially are very impressionable. So you can really mold and model them to be, the way you want them to be. That's a really rewarding side of it. That's a side of it that I knew would be very gratifying and make, this work very rewarding, but I don't think I realized how rewarding, how gratifying that side of it would be.
Now, with what you're saying there, you've worked with guys that are in environments that are very stressful. The environment can break them down quickly. Somehow they find a way to overcome the environment they're thrown in. Well, now I just had this conversation with another coach the other day. We're looking at these kids that are put in such a stressful environment, they're never able to maybe figure out how to cope, so they quit or they go and they do something else. Was there anything you learned from your previous experience that's helped these kids manage the stress they're under?
With the way we train, our training sessions, especially in the weight room, are as fast and chaotic as possible by design. I try to make our training sessions, from a mental standpoint, a focus and attention to detail standpoint, the hardest thing that they will ever do, because I want the game to actually feel slower. I want practice to feel slower than our training does. So I actually try to make things stressful on purpose. Now, we have to do things in order to set them up to be successful with that in mind. Our verbiage, our flow of training, the way we are, I say we, myself and my assistant, we have to be the most consistent part of their day, because if the training is very chaotic, if it's very stressful, if it's, very fast and very taxing mentally, if we're all over the place and they don't know what to expect from us, on top of that, we're never going to get anything done. So I like to call it, just controlled chaos. We try to go fast. We try to make it as, if you were looking from the outside in, if you didn't know anything about strength and conditioning, you would just think, I mean, this is chaos. This is the music is loud. They're yelling. The kids are yelling. I mean, they're just running around, like their pants are on fire. I mean, but that's how we want things, because a lot of sport is like that. We constantly preach, confidence through preparation. I don't know who said it, but the myth of you rise to the level of your competition. I mean, that's false. You don't rise to the level of anything. You fall to the level of your preparation, your training. So if our training is at a unbelievably high level in every possible way, then they're going to be confident going into game day. They're going to be confident going into practice, that from a physical preparation standpoint, they are where they need to be and they are better than their opponent. And that was a piece of it that took a while for them to understand. These kids don't, and when I walked in the door, when it came to strength and conditioning, they don't know anything. So when I started talking about, the phases of training that we'll go through and what in season looks like versus off season and why, I mean, they're just staring at me with their eyes huge, because they have no idea what I'm talking about. We're at the point now that you're starting to see or you are seeing the confidence in the kids from the training that we're doing. It's really easy for them to be confident when their body starts changing, especially with male athletes. When their body starts changing, when they can look in the mirror and see they look different, they're going to be more confident. And confidence doesn't get talked about enough in this field, but that is probably the greatest thing you can give an athlete. So we talk about that a lot. That was something that I got from Zach Woodfin, who I worked for, at a couple previous stops. He would always talk about, during the season, if we train on a Sunday, we have to be better on this Sunday than whoever we're playing. Then Monday, which was an off day, you've got to be better in your free time than your opponent is on Monday. You've got to rest, you've got to recover, you got to eat, you got to hydrate better than they do. Then on Tuesday, when we train, you got to be better than them on Tuesday. And then we have to practice better. And you just take it one event, one day at a time, and you add all of those up. You're going into game day knowing I did everything in my power to prepare better than my opponent. I have a fighting chance on game day. So we preach things like that a lot. We constantly rank, record, and publish, their sprint times and their jump numbers, and we show them their progress on their lifts, just to try to build confidence in what they're doing, and then also just build buy-in. That, this training is working. What we're doing, we're working hard for a reason, and these are the results that show from it. Because these kids are smart. They go on the internet, they read, they research, they see what other schools are doing. What we do looks different from the school down the road. It may look the same. They've got buddies, they've got friends at other schools. They talk about it. So you've got to have a training system in place. Is number one, safe and productive, but also two, that not only produces results, but I really think you've got to have a system in place that shows results in training pretty often. If we just grind and grind and grind and grind, and there's never any results of improvement from what we're doing, these aren't college athletes. This isn't tactical. They're not training to go fight war. They're not training to go play Tennessee on Saturday. I mean, they need something to show for what they're doing. And 7th, 8th, and 9th graders have very short memories. So they need reinforcement and result of that often.
Now, back in their ways, you said this, and I think I've learned through maturity how important it is. And it did take me a while. You just had a life-changing event, so you've got to balance it all out with consistency. Are the times you have to step back and center yourself and be like, look, I'm letting an outside force dictate how I'm doing things, and kind of get back to that consistent part so that the athletes know you're going to be the same every day?
Early on, I had to kind of check myself from time to time because I had to remind myself this is high school, middle school. We're not getting ready to compete in the SEC. Our athletic programs, it is I would say as serious as you can be in the high school setting. Our head football coach in the collegiate ranks for 38 years. I mean, high school football in our league is very competitive. High school basketball in our league is incredibly competitive. I mean, it is high stakes, but at the end of the day, it is high school. So there were times my first year there, I had to kind of back off and remind myself that this is high school. Um, there, there are certain things that I don't allow myself to do because I know it's going to get me too wound up. I don't. I'm on Huddle. I'm part of the football staff account, and so I'm on Huddle. But I don't allow myself to watch tape, especially if we lose a game, because I'm gonna get so worked up and so upset that I'm not going to be effective the next time they come to the weight room. Just like little things like that. It's funny you mentioned it because when my daughter was born last week, I was out the back half of the week, and all of the kids were asking my assistant, like, oh, what's he going to be like? What's he going to be like when he comes back? Is he going to be nicer? Is he going to be in a better mood? And he was looking at him. He's like, well, I think he's going to be in a worse mood because he's probably not going to sleep. So I thought that was funny, but I do think, by this point in year 4, that's not really something that comes up often. I don't know who told me. I don't know if it was Coach Woodfin. I don't know if it was someone who coached me or I heard it somewhere. But I do know that when I started coaching, when I started out as an intern, then I moved to a GA. When I was a GA and you start interviewing for full time positions, and they ask you, what your strengths are, my number one answer always was consistency. I want the kids to know what they're going to get from me every day. So that is a part of my coaching style that I've always kind of hung my hat on because I had a lot of coaches in college. We had the highest of success. We had the worst results possible. So we had a lot of coaching change, a lot of coaching turnover while I was playing, and the coaches that I respected the most and I admired the most and really learned from, not just from football but of life, were the most consistent ones. I think that is something that really stuck with me, and I realized, that's something I need to be as a coach. I do think coaching is a noble profession. I think the development of young people is a noble calling. It's an important calling, and if the coach and the teacher, like my wife is a school teacher, if this applies to that as well, because she's the most consistent person I know. If we're not consistent, if we're not on top of things, if we can't block out stuff that's going on in our personal life or at home or whatever, and do the job, how can we expect the kids to do it?
So moving into this, you've got the middle school and the high school. You have full development control.
Yep.
There's a big span between a 7th grader and a senior.
Huge.
How are you able to progress that out to get the development you want consistently over that time?
One of the big challenges with that is the logistics of that. We train on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have, depending on the time of the year, we have anywhere from 8 to 10 groups, and we have 7th through 12th, male and female. And there's not only differences between seventh grade to eighth grade to ninth grade, but there's also differences between 7th grade boys and 7th grade girls. So it's a lot to manage. It's a lot to keep up with. We got some sports that are in season, some that are off season. I mean, it's a lot of moving pieces. Before I even took this job, I knew I needed a very, very flexible plan, and I needed a plan that I could implement across as many populations as possible and make subtle adjustments and tweaks here and there to make it work based on who was in the weight room at that time or who was on the field at that time. What we do is 90% of what we do on paper is exactly the same regardless of grade. Our 7th graders follow the same training split that our varsity football team trains. Now, the difference is where they fall on the movement progression and regression, where they fall on the relative intensity. We do everything in 3-week training blocks. somebody asked me the other day, just describe your training philosophy, or describe your training program. And I think the best way I could describe it is we use a holistic undulating concurrent model. Holistic meaning we do a lot of different things. We're not married to one set of movements. We're not anti-Olympic. We're not only Olympic. If it makes us better, if it works logistically in our room, if we have the equipment to do it and we can coach it really well, we do it. That's what we care about. The undulating part of that is we manipulate our intensity week to week. We don't really do things in a linear fashion. Week one for us is moderate volume, moderate intensity. Week two is high volume, low intensity. And then week three is low volume, high intensity. And then we repeat. We do that year round. That's in season or that's off season. Concurrent being we train every quality in different dosages year round. We don't do hypertrophy blocks. We don't do strength blocks. We don't do peaking, anything like that. All qualities get addressed year round, just in different dosages, depending on the sport and then depending on if it's in season or off season form. With that 3-week block that we have, it's very easy to, one, handle kids not being there. Because if, say we got a guy or girl who misses week 2 for whatever reason, if we're just following a straight linear plan, well, then everything after that week is going to be harder for them because they missed the foundation work required for those following weeks by missing that week or missing that session. Versus our way of doing it, when we undulate the intensity and we just repeat that medium, low, high, if they miss week 2, it doesn't matter because they're going to get it in a couple of weeks. Again, they're going to have an opportunity to do that session again in a couple of weeks. With in-season training, it's very easy for us to manipulate the variables because if we've got a really big conference game on a Friday night and it's also our high intensity week 3, we can just back off that intensity a little bit and then we're going to get it again in 3 weeks. Or if it's our high volume, lower intensity week, we can just drop that volume a little bit. So our system is very flexible, and because it's so flexible, we're able to use it across the board with all of our age groups. So it's very easy for our kids to go from year to year without any hiccups, because the biggest jumps really come when they go from the 8th grade to the 9th grade, and then obviously the 9th grade to the 10th grade. And then once they're in high school, things kind of, level out. But when they go from the 8th grade to the 9th grade, they're going from being some of our 8th graders start in some sports, but they go from being more of a, backup situational reserve role, whatever their sport is. Now they're in the 9th grade, they're expected to be a starter. So that's a big jump. Then when they go from the 9th grade to the 10th grade, we're talking about going from JV sports to high school sports, and you're playing against seniors. You're playing against much more physically mature athletes. So because of that, our system is designed to be very flexible and very fluid going from grade to grade because their overall training model never changes. Now, what does change is the movement progressions and the intensities, right? When they're in the 7th grade, we spend as much time as we need on our basic fundamentals before we go to the next thing. We literally, the first week we come in, the only thing we learn to do is how to warm up, and that takes as long as possible because if anything is wrong, anything is incorrect, we fix it, we start over, we don't move on until those things are exactly the way they're supposed to be done. All of our, planking, our bridging, our dynamic movements, whatever it is, none of that gets progressed until it's perfect. Then when we go into the weight room, this past 7th grade class, the first week we were in there, we did 2 things after we warmed up. We learned how to address the bar, do a clean pull, and get into position 1. That was all we did. Then we learned how to goblet squat. That's all we did for a week at least. It may have been 2 weeks. Then we learned how to jump catch. Then we learned how to progress that, and then and so forth and so on. But we don't rush anything when they're in the middle school. We take as much time as possible. Our goal each year is to have them ready for the next grade. So when they're in the 7th grade, the goal is that when the summer of their 8th grade year starts, they can train with the 9th graders at the same time and be okay. They can do all the movements that 9th graders are going to do, all the drills out on the field. They can handle the volume of running out on the field. They can handle the volume of training in the weight room and it not be log jam. We're not having to slow things down. We're not having to make all these adjustments. And then when they're in the 8th grade, it's by the time the summer of their 9th grade year starts, they're the best ones in that group in the room. They're able to lead the pack. Then the entire 9th grade year, it's all about preparing them for high school. And this is not just from a programming standpoint. This is also from a messaging standpoint. We are just constantly bombarding them with, when they get to the end of football season, because that's obviously the first sport, but when they get to the end of football season, when they're in the 8th grade, we are telling them constantly, this time next year, you guys are getting ready to dress up on Friday night. And that year is not a long time. We don't have time. We don't have time to waste. We've got to go. We've got to get bigger. We've got to get stronger because it's coming. Then when they're in the 9th grade, it's this time next year, you're not just moving up to the high school. You are the high school. You are on the varsity team, football, baseball, basketball, whatever it is. We take things very slow, but we're very aggressively slow, if that makes sense. We get the bar, and I know a lot of people don't do this, and I'll use our Olympic lifting as an example. We put a barbell in their hands day one. I know a lot of people take a lot of steps prior to that before they put a bar in their hand, but we put a bar in their hands day one. Reason being, I'm a believer of if a hang clean or a front squat is the end goal. We'll just use those two movements as an example. If those are the end goal, we need to get there as fast as possible because the longer they spend on that movement, the better they're going to get at that movement because they need practice at that movement. If we take 100 steps to get there and it takes us weeks and weeks or months, they're not going to get as much time to practice that movement because we've spent so much time laying foundation. And we are laying a foundation when we put a bar in their hands day one. We're just laying a foundation with that movement specifically. We're just getting a lot more time doing that movement. And the intensity is, people hear me say that and think, oh, that's dangerous. They're learning how to do a clean pull with a 15-pound bar or a 45-pound bar if they're a stronger, bigger kid. And they're learning how to turn their knuckles down, draw their shoulder blades back, and put a slight bit in their knee. That's it. But they're getting lots of reps at that. They're learning how to do things with detail. They're learning how to listen to coaching, listen to instruction. I've found that approach works best for us. Once we get to actually performing the movements, they're a lot better off than they would have been, in my opinion, if we spent, just weeks and weeks of doing all these other movements that we think translate and build the movements we're trying to get to eventually. I think, we just take the shortest path and we scale the intensity way back. The intensity with those younger groups comes from coaching. It doesn't come from what we're doing. It comes from coaching. And that's part of we talked about earlier. That's part of the learning to deal with chaos, learning to deal with adversity. Our kids, by the time Christmas hits, when they're in the 7th grade, are very much more coachable than they were when they got to us. They are a lot more receptive to information. They're a lot more able to process things and implement cueing and corrections that we give them. That's kind of how we build them the later grades in the following years. But the training split's exactly the same. Once we kind of get through those first couple of weeks, we start with the position 1 clean, hang clean, above the knee hang clean. We just call it position 1. We start with that because we Olympic lift a lot, and that's the most technically demanding movement that we do. So we start with that, and it gives us the opportunity to learn a front squat at the same time. And once we get through that initial phase, the 7th graders are doing the exact same training split everybody else is doing. Like right now, for example, Monday for us is an upper body lift. Tuesday's a movement session. Wednesday's a lower body lift. Thursday's a movement session. Friday's a total body lift. 7th graders are doing the exact same thing the high school football team's doing. The movements and the intensity are just different.
Now, there's a few different things we could talk about in there, and I kind of got some notes, and maybe we'll catch them at different times. But you're running a concurrent system. Are you switching out movements every 3 weeks that are very similar, or are you looking at deficits? How are you deciding where to go next? Obviously, you have a progression, but weakness is going to show that needs to be addressed. So how are you adjusting that?
So some things don't come out. Some of our strength lifts don't come out. Like we're always going to back squat with the high school. We're always going to front squat with the middle school. We're always going to bench press. We're always going to RDL. We may move the grip out, do snatch grip RDLs. If I think we're having trouble staying over the bar and keeping good posture when we do our snatch pulls. Where the changes come from, our accessory work changes every 3 weeks in some way. We may switch grips. We may switch implements. We may go from a reverse lunge to a rear foot elevated split squat, or just a regular split squat. We may go from back extensions to single leg back extensions. We do get a lot of variety there. Where the changes come is on our upper and lower body days, the front half of our lift looks like a dynamic effort session. The back half of the lift looks like a repeat effort session with our strength work. For example, right now on our upper body lift, the first sequence we go through, we're finishing up doing position 3 snatch pulls. So just a snatch pull from the ground. Once they finish that, they go into a plyo push up, then they go into a med ball throw. On our lower body lift, we're doing a banded pin squat, then a trap bar jump, then a seated jump. So the movements week to week will change in that sequence on those days. We'll do different throw variations. We'll do different push-up variations. The snatch pulls on the upper body day, in a perfect world, we would snatch. Our room is very narrow, and I think we could coach it to where they didn't miss. But I just know the one time we did miss, we're going to have a kid throw a bar into another kid's face standing across the way, and I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if that happened, and we're not going to take that chance. We will do snatch pulls from different positions. We'll do them from position 1. We'll do them from below the knee. We'll do them in sequences. A lot of that just gets determined based on what I'm seeing with bar speed and positions. There are kids able to stay over the bar. We push them through the whole foot at the top. On our lower body days with our jumping, we just implemented the banded pin squat 2 weeks ago. That was something that I was wanting to do for a while, and we went without bands at first just to get familiar with the movement and the intent. And the intent wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be, so we added the bands pretty quickly. We have a lot of different jumps that we will do on that day based on the time of year is a big factor. With track going on right now, we're doing a lot less, and a lot of, especially in middle school, 75% of our kids participate in track in some fashion, jumping or throwing or running. We're doing a lot less jumping than we normally would just to help facilitate recovery, and they're getting so much of that at track practice. But we will do a lot of different variations on that day, and a lot of it just gets determined on what we're seeing with our verticals. We have jump mats. We get on them. We try to get on them once a week if we have time, and it flows and doesn't take away from the flow of training. If our numbers are not improving, we need to make a change. If our numbers are improving, we stay with what we're doing. On those days, we're going to have some type of fast intent movement. And I say fast intent in that it's going to be heavy-ish, but it's not going to be so heavy that the intent is not great. We're going to have some type of loaded throw or loaded jump, and then we're going to have some type of even lighter loaded throw or loaded jump. That's worked really well for us. We started doing that about a year ago. Our intent with the barbell, our intent in the weight room has benefited tremendously from that. And then, some of the concurrent things, we do some type of speed work year round, regardless of the sport. When it's football season with our JV kids, the day before the game, we do a speed session in the weight room. We warm up like we would for a field session. We do our plyos, we do our running mechanics, and then we put them on the clock in the weight room. We do some type of time sprint so we can see where we are with the high school guys. On game day especially, our pregame warm-up looks like a warm-up for a speed session. We do a lot of plyos. We do a lot of skipping and jumping, and we do some type of max effort sprint before they go onto the field so we know. And then we'll do that later or earlier in the week as well. But just so that we know we are touching that specific quality year round. It's not just going ignored.
So to get into your dynamic effort a little bit,
Mhm.
I love velocities. I love seeing the benefit of the speed work and all of that. But it seems like on the younger population, you can get a little too fast and it doesn't carry over the field. That's what I think I see. Is that correct? I don't know. Louis has a chart and Brian Mann have a chart, and they differ just a little bit in that accelerative speed that Brian Mann has. And for Louis, that would be strength speed. Where are you trying to fall in that curve?
So with the younger population, the dynamic effort work has carryover, but I think it has less carryover than it does in the high school setting for the high school groups, simply because the technique is not as solidified. So when you're trying to get them to move the bar really, really fast, regardless of what the movement is, they're not able to hang on to technique and produce incredible outputs at the same time. You may get 1 rep out of 3 that you're getting what you want. You may get 2 reps out of 3, but you're not going to get rep after rep after rep with those groups if all you're preaching is, or all you're trying to get is just velocity and crazy intent and output and those things. The high school is able to do that, especially our guys and girls that we've had for 4 years now, because they've had 4 years of whatever movements that we're doing. They've had 4 years of practice. They've had, a lot of time under a bar. The middle school setting, they get better, but they're not as consistent as the high school is going to be. So with the high school population, I'm going to err on the side of actually less weight, more velocity, because I think they can handle the output while maintaining technique. The middle school setting, I'm going to err on the side of a little bit more load and a little bit less velocity, so that it kind of regulates the technique, because I'm not going to sacrifice technique just for speeds. I'm not going to sacrifice techniques for the bars moving really, really fast. If it's moving fast and our technique's all over the place, and we look, like we're in a car wreck while we're doing the movement, it's not any good for us. That's kind of how we approached it. Our 7th graders, our dynamic work simply for them is throws and jumps. We structure our quote dynamic work the way you would see it structured, in a powerlifting training setting. We do triples, we do doubles, and we do anywhere from 4 to 8 sets of them. So when we're going through that lower body dynamic sequence that we're on right now, I was talking about earlier, we're doing 2 reps on the pin squat. We're doing 2 trap bar jumps. We're doing 2 seated jumps with dumbbells. And when the first group gets done, the second group and the third group are rolling automatically. When that first group gets done, I'm hitting the stopwatch, and when 45 seconds hits, we're blowing the whistle. We're going again. So it's very much like you would see in a typical conjugate style training program. And our 7th graders are doing the same thing, but they're doing a trap bar jump, and then they're doing a vertical jump or a seated jump. They're not ready to handle a squatting motion with accommodating resistance and all of that, or incredible intent on the way up. I mean, we do coach, we do preach, move the bar as fast as you can, but that gets ramped up as they age, as they get better at the movements. With the middle school population, the velocity is important, but it's not everything. So we tend to load them a touch heavier relatively to them than we would with the high school. With the high school, it's anywhere from 40 to 50% on the bar, and we are trying to move this thing as fast as humanly possible, because our technique at that point is ingrained. Because that's and talking about powerlifting, that's a thing that people, I think, make a mistake of when it comes to dynamic effort work. It's either they've got way too much weight on the bar and they're not hitting the velocities they need to hit, or they've got the correct loading set up between the bar weight and the accommodated resistance, but they're not in shape enough to be able to handle the pace that it needs to be performed at, or they don't have the technique ingrained, and they're all over the place. Because really light, really fast reps with horrible technique are not doing me any good. They're not doing me any good. And it's even worse in powerlifting because the technique is everything. In athleticism, if the technique is awful, or team sports, if the technique is off a little bit, it's okay because you're still training general qualities. In the powerlifting setting, if the technique is off a little bit, you're not getting any stronger or faster because your technique is not what it's going to be when the bar is actually loaded and it counts.
And that makes a lot of sense. If you're off out of the groove just a hair, that lift ain't going.
I mean, you're wasting your time. I mean, at that point, you may as well just shut it down and do rep effort work.
You got into something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I've been talking to some of my younger kids. You rank and publish your jumps. So let me throw this at you. You'll get a kid in with very little work capacity.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see that jump peak, and let's say they hit a 19-inch jump. Well, they're only going to be able to hold that for 1-2 jumps, and then it drops. It seems like as their work capacity improves, then they hit an average. So now they're averaging close to 19. Then they get a little stronger, it peaks again, and almost the same process begins, only now it's a shorter process because capacity is already built. Is that something you're seeing, or is that just something I'm imagining?
No, I think that's true. There's a couple analogies I can think of, like, the 225 test at the NFL Combine, as an example. One of the things that I always thought, and this kind of got confirmed to me when I started working for Coach Woodfink, is he was at Exos before they were Exos, and they obviously handled a lot of combine training, and he did all the pro day training for the guys when we were at our various stops. But there was always max effort work included in their programming for the 225 test, because the thought was, if you raise the ceiling, then 225 doesn't feel as big of a deal anymore. So you're able to perform more reps with it because it's relatively not as heavy for you. And I think that applies with the work capacity, in that the bigger the gas tank is, right, the more often you're able to sustain high level efforts is one side of it. But the other side of it is we still have to get stronger and more powerful, because if we can increase your strength, increase your power, increase your elasticity, all the things you need to be a great jumper, or just use sprinting as another example, a great sprinter, right? To where, say, your max vertical is a 26, well, then your average jump when you're slightly tired is now 21, and it used to be an 18. I think that's a product of two things. Of one, you've gotten stronger and more powerful, so your absolute threshold is a lot higher, your output's a lot higher, but also you're in better shape. You have a higher level of capacity, so you're able to operate at a higher intensity for a lot longer than you used to be. And, I know you see this on social media, the anti-conditioning, pro-conditioning talks. I mean, people are all over the place these days. And, we spend a lot of time on conditioning at JA. And our conditioning is something that I take a lot of pride in, because one, I think it's a testament to our kids' hard work and sacrifice when we are the most conditioned team on, whatever, pick a sport. I think it's a testament to them, but also we don't just condition, get on the line, do a bunch of mindless, just, never ending running. We do things in a conditioning standpoint that I think have a lot of carryover in different areas and kill multiple birds with one stone. We do what I call strength-based conditioning, which is simply we take the mat drill concept and the mat drill idea, and instead of doing just, random things that are going to make you really tired, we replace them with strength movements. We replace them with sleds, forward and backward sled drags, lateral sled drags, prowler pushes, farmer walks. We'll do like upper body metabolic stuff, things like that. I think our middle school kids especially benefit from that, maybe more than a lot of other things that we do, because we are learning to perform in discomfort. We are getting stronger. We are getting in better shape. We're getting, an opportunity to condition really, really hard, but we're not just running them into the ground, and we'll do it. We'll do it in a circuit fashion. We'll go 3 or 4 minutes at a station and various work to rest ratios. That's that's been a piece of our training that I have seen reap really big benefits for our kids. And, it shows up everywhere. I mean, it shows up in the weight room. It shows up on the field when it's time to sprint or it's time to jump. Our kids are able to handle a lot more training volume as the years go on, as the months go on within the year. And, I don't think work capacity gets talked about enough, especially in the high school and middle school setting, because like we talked about earlier, these kids are doing so much outside of when I have them. We've got kids who play football, baseball, basketball for us, but they're also on a travel soccer team, their own travel baseball team. They play AAU, and they may be on a travel football team. So it's like they're going to do that stuff no matter how much you preach to them, the possible negatives of that and the injury risks that come with that. And they're going to do it anyway. So you have got to prepare them to be able to handle that. And, work capacity and GPP is a really big part of that. And with the younger grades, a lot of times, you may think a kid is just, a poor athlete, or he doesn't have a lot of just athletic, ability right away. And it's like, well, no, there is athletic ability and there are tools there. The problem is he gets tired or she gets tired so quickly, they're never able to express it. If they can't handle getting through the warm up or they can't handle getting through the first 10 minutes of a lift, of course you're going to think, this kid doesn't have a chance because they can't handle the pace and they can't handle the volume of what you're asking them to do. And it's, some would say, oh, well, you need to adjust accordingly. Well, it's like, no, that practice in the game is not going to be any different. If they can't get through a 35, 40-minute lift session, they're not going to be able to get through a 2-hour practice. They're not going to be able to get through a 2-hour game, much less all the other stuff they're doing outside of when they're with us. So that's a topic that I don't think gets discussed enough in this field, especially in the high school and middle school setting.
You're kind of hitting on a conversation I had last night with a kid. He's a younger kid, plays travel baseball, loves travel baseball. He's a pitcher. I'm watching his work capacity through his jumps, and we're doing some weighted marches. Watch his jump spike come down. So then the next question I ask is, well, how long can you maintain your fastball? 15 pitches.
Yeah.
That's not an arm thing. That's not a speed thing. It's a capacity thing. So we have to find ways to develop your capacity that takes you longer into the game.
Mm-hmm.
And in saying that, I obviously stalked your Instagram and saw what you're doing with your kids. So this kind of set it up where I understood you were doing a lot of sled pulls. You're doing a lot of weighted vest work. You're doing things that aren't maybe a traditional idea of conditioning, but it all builds capacity. The one question I had in that is, I kind of started putting this together. You can put a lot of weight behind them. They can drag a heavy sled for a long time, but it takes very little weight in front of them to just wear them out. And especially in the traps, the isometric hold. I mean, if you've ever walked somewhere with a camera around your neck or had a welding hood on your head and you're not conditioned for that, you're going to be worn slick fast. Have you found the frontal loading maybe helps in a way that backward loading doesn't?
A backward sled drag or a forward sled walk, and even because we do a ton of work on prowlers, we are doing those things for different reasons. The backward sled walk, obviously we can load that thing up as heavy as many plates as we can fit on there. That to me is simply just a quad and knee health movement. It just happens to be moving, so there's a little bit of a conditioning effect there. The forward sled or even the prowler to me is really an important movement for us because we're not only getting leg strength, and we're not only getting trunk strength if the prowler's heavy enough and they've got to maintain, fight really hard to maintain good positions, but we're also getting sprint mechanics, acceleration mechanics, because if we load the prowler heavy enough and they've got to get a really, really aggressive, which we coach them to do this, but a really aggressive forward angle, torso and shin angle, we're just reinforcing sprint mechanics, acceleration mechanics while they're tired. And, to me, we can't get enough of that. The more we reinforce the positions we want them to achieve when they're sprinting, when they're moving, the better off we're going to be. Because if they're used to achieving those positions when they're a little fatigued and they're tired, they're going to get those positions. They're going to hit those positions when they are tired and having to sprint. I was thinking about it the other day when we were doing some repeat sprints with the football team a couple of weeks ago before spring practice started, and I was watching from the side, and we hit a rep, and I was thinking, we've gotten to the point where 90% of our guys, when we're doing conditioning, look exactly the same coming off the line. Aggressive angles, eyes are down, huge sweep in the arms, thigh separation, all those things. Like, we look the way you're wanting them to look, and we're all looking that way. And I really think a big part of that is our, like our junior class, for example, or our sophomore class. I mean, they had 2-3 years of doing this stuff every single week, multiple times a week. And it's just, they don't even have to think about it anymore. It's just muscle memory. When I'm in a 2-point or 3-point stance and the whistle blows and it's time to sprint, my body just gets in that position because we've done it so many times. We don't just do it with our sprint work, because when we do our sprint work, we do a lot of heavy marches before we get into resisted running and then free sprinting, but we also do it when we condition. And I think the more often you can get them into the biomechanical positions that you want them to get in, and especially under fatigue, the better off they're going to be.
So me and you are seeing this a lot alike. I feel like I'm on the backside of the argument that most guys would make. It's all top speed, top speed, top speed. To me, you run fast ever since you're a little kid. The needle doesn't, I'm not going to say the needle doesn't move at top speed, but the needle moves in acceleration. Body angle, strength, ability to hold that. It always seems like I could get a kid faster if I could get him to be a better accelerator. And we've done this through chains, sleds, resistance to build that strength, and then look for the weakness and then carry it over to the weight room to find what translates over. I think acceleration isn't practiced near enough, and it's a skill in its own self.
We spend more time on acceleration than top end, simply because acceleration is a lot easier to recover from than max velocity running is. We do spend time on max velocity. We just don't spend as much time on it as we do acceleration. One, like I said, the recovery side of things. Two, I do think the improvements to be made are greater with acceleration than they are with max velocity, because part of it's because acceleration is easier to recover from, so we can just do it more often, and we can do it at higher volumes than we can max velocity. And when I look at a 7th, 8th, or 9th grader, a 7th grader, but a new 8th or 9th grader who's new to us, if you ask them to run just a 40, for example, they're going to be bad everywhere. They're going to be bad accelerating, they're going to be bad transitioning, and they're going to be bad at max velocity. They're going to be bad everywhere. And what is the easiest thing to fix right away? It's going to be the acceleration phase, because, like I said, we can do it more often. We can do it for more volume and more reps, and we can max velocity work. And also, we're never going to get in good max velocity positions if we don't fix the acceleration, everything leading up to it. And, thinking about sport, what do you do more of? You do more accelerating than you do maintaining and holding max velocity. You think about football, some positions never in a game get to max velocity. Some positions do. And a lot of times you're only getting to max velocity if something bad's happened. You can look at like GPS data with NFL players, or when we were at whatever stop and we had catapult, our best defenders in practice or in games always had the slowest velocities or the slowest mile per hour because they never got beat. They never got in position to where they had to run that fast. When you have a guy who's hitting 21, 22 miles an hour all the time, he plays defense. It's like, what are you doing? This guy's hitting these speeds because he can beat every play. He doesn't understand his job. He's got speed. It's great, but he doesn't understand his job, versus you've got a guy who's hitting 18, 19, occasionally 20 miles an hour, and he's not giving, he played talking about like a defensive back, obviously. He's not giving up any catches. He's targeted 3 times and none of them go for a catch. They stop throwing at him. And it's like, of course, he's never going to hit max velocity. So I do think there's improvements that can be made on max velocity. I just don't think the improvements are as great as they are with acceleration, because the opportunity to improve acceleration is greater than it is with max velocity. I do think it's important to expose them to max velocity, regardless of position, regardless of age, all of those things, because max velocity sprinting touches, qualities and your nervous system in ways that nothing else can. And if that never gets exposed, if that never gets trained, you're leaving gains, speed gains, strength gains, all kinds of gains on the table that you would never get if you don't do it. I never want the first time a kid experiences something to be in the game. I don't want the first time they experience something to be in practice, but I definitely don't want the first time they experience something to be in a game.
Now, you make an interesting point there. I agree with everything you said. I don't neglect top speed. It's just we're going to touch it and then we're going to build the base. But yeah. You talked about, and I fall back to what Louis said, 65% of most any race is acceleration. So
right.
Where do you fall? But recovery, you were talking about recovery in there. Your better accelerators are going to recover from top speed better than your poor accelerators, because they're going to be in acceleration longer, which is alactic. So if you're running a 2010, your better accelerators are going to be able to have more repeatability and recover faster because they were alactic longer.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I know you got a new baby. You've been on here quite a while. I don't know how many questions I actually touched on that I researched and went through, because the conversation has been great and I've just been taking notes off that. But let's see what I can find to kind of round this thing out, and we'll go from there. But I noticed you do a lot of cleans, you do a lot of explosive trap bars, you do a lot of jumps, you're getting into triple extension a lot. And the one thing I've seen from triple extension is maybe the development of the calves, the gastroc, and how that carries over to the jump, where, calf raises and things like that may not be quite covering that dynamic, explosive muscle building property. How much better have your jumps been since you've incorporated more of a triple extension style movement?
A lot. I can't remember the book that I read. It was a book specifically about vertical jumping. And one of the things the guy who wrote it was talking about is the best jumpers in the world are able to produce force the longest, which was something that I had been told, or we had learned prior. I think it was at Kansas. We had some brand of force plate. I can't remember which it was, but they talked about the best force plate scans they have are the guys who are able to produce force right up until the moment when their feet leave the ground, and they're able to produce force in that top range. If you think about a squat depth, like that top quarter of the squatting pattern on the concentric, they're able to continue to produce force at that point, versus someone who's really great on the eccentric and then kind of dies out as they get to the top of the movement. But we fall, it's like we were talking about earlier. There's the anti-Olympic lifting crowd, and then there's the all we do is Olympic lifting crowd. And I think we really fall somewhere in the middle, leaning more towards Olympic lifting than being completely neutral. When I look at it, we do them for different reasons. You get things from Olympic lifting that you don't get from loaded jumping. You get things from loaded jumping that you don't get from Olympic lifting. Honestly, one of our best builders of jumping, in my opinion, is front squatting. When you look at a front squat and you look at a vertical jump or even a broad jump, the patterns and the loading of the hips and the knees and all of those things, like they're very similar to each other. And that was one of the reasons we invested in chains, was because I wanted to really drive the intent on the concentric of our front squats and learning how to produce force completely until they're locked out at the top. And when we started adding chains to our front squats, and the intent had to change, because obviously as the chains leave the ground, the weight becomes heavier, so you can't just die out on the way up. Our verticals started going up. But to go off a little bit, off topic a little bit, but the two Olympic lift versus not Olympic lift, I don't think it's as big of a deal as people make it out to be. I think it starts with, can you teach it? Are you comfortable with teaching? Yes or no? If the answer is no, don't even worry about it. If the answer is yes, I think there's a lot of benefit in doing them. I think there's a lot of benefit in doing loaded jumps. We do both things. Olympic lifts give you rapid triple extension into rapid triple flexion that you're not going to get with loaded jumps. Loaded jumps obviously have a way shorter learning curve than Olympic lifts do. And the intent with a loaded jump is going to be greater than it is with Olympic lift, because there's just less moving parts. If I stand in the middle of a trap bar and tell you to jump as high as you can, your intent and your output is going to be a lot higher than it is if you're still learning and still figuring out how to do a clean. The beautiful thing with Olympic lifting is I think there are indirect carryovers to specifically sprinting that you're going to get from Olympic lifting that you're not going to get anywhere else. And I say indirect because nobody is going to Olympic lift with the sole purpose of getting faster, right? If I was to say to you, you've got 6 weeks to PR your 40, the first thing you're not going to do is go into the weight room, start doing hang cleans, right? You're not directly getting faster from doing Olympic lifts, but I do think there are indirect carryovers from the way the body moves that carry over to sprinting, because to be a good Olympic lifter, to have high outputs in that movement category, you've got to be incredibly stiff. You've got to be incredibly propulsive. You've got to be powerful. All at the same time, you've got to be very fluid and very smooth. And what is that? If I just describe that, what does that sound like? That sounds like sprinting. You've got to be stiff. You've got to be rigid. You've got to have incredible force outputs, but you've also got to be very fluid and very smooth at the same time. So it's direct, but it's not direct. And I think anytime you can get athletes moving just in similar fashions, the better they're going to be at other things. If they're able to be stiff and be rigid when doing a clean, but also very fluid and very smooth when doing the clean, it's going to be a lot easier for them to understand, I've got to be incredibly stiff, tight, and rigid when I set up to do this sprint, but also at the same time, I can't be robotic. And it's going to be I think that carryover or that understanding of that is easier if they're doing it in multiple places, if that makes sense. That's a benefit of doing Olympic lifting that you're not getting anywhere else. How intricate the lifts are, how hard they are to learn, I actually think it's a benefit. I'm in a situation where I'm getting a 7th grader for the next 6 years. So teaching time doesn't matter to me, because I'm going to get him for the next 6 years if, he doesn't leave JA for whatever reason. If you've got a kid for 12 weeks, I can understand, okay, I don't need to spend 4 weeks learning how to get into a front rack and get in and out of, the power position. I mean, we don't have time for that. But I think if time's not a factor, I do think there is benefit to the kids having to learn something that's highly complex, highly complicated, incredibly detailed, and just, to be honest, difficult to do. I think when we talked about the difference in coachability from a 7th grader in August versus Christmas, I think one of the reasons for that is we spend so much time learning how to Olympic lift and what they have to do, in the coaching cues they have to pick up on, and how they have to learn this movement, how much attention to detail they have to show. I think if we didn't Olympic lift, they wouldn't be as far along in their coachability versus if we did Olympic lift, if that makes sense. The amount of triple extension work that we do, I do think carries over in a lot of ways, because, when I was talking earlier about when I was watching all of our guys take off from the line on repeat sprints, how everybody looks the same. I had another, moment of this months ago, but, we do a lot of med ball jumps in our warm up just to, get them moving fast before we get to the bar. And when I was watching them jump, we just have them hug the med ball, drop into a quarter squat, jump as high as they can. We take the upper body out of it. I was watching, it was like every single one of our guys is triple extended, every single one of them. And I can remember being in college at certain stops. And it's like, you're watching cleans from the side, you're watching jumps from the side. It's like, he's leaving his hips behind. His feet are leaving the ground too early. Like, we're all over the place. And I'm watching our guys do these loaded jumps. I'm like, every single one of our guys is hitting triple extension. And then when we go to the bar and we're doing 3-position cleans or doing a pull above the knee, below the knee from the ground, I'm like, all of our guys are extending for the most part. It's still not perfect because it's a lot more complicated than a med ball squat jump is, but all of our guys are extending at least 2 of the 3 positions we're cleaning from. And you see, a rapid acceleration of the bar when it leaves the power position every single time. And I think it's like we talked about with the acceleration mechanics and the benefit of the sled, benefit of the prowler, is we do it so much and we do it so often that it just becomes muscle memory at that point. We don't have to, really harp on or cue that much to get them to do that, because we just do it all the time.
And that makes a lot of sense. You're finding a progression and you can get as many gains as possible. You're adjusting the volume, I guess. And I think about this a lot, is if cleaning is what you want to do, it's going to take a while to get the weight on the bar that actually moves the needle. But at the same time, if you can find something else to get the volume from, like let's say you got poor squatters, but you can hook them up to a belted march or a ATP, something like that. Well, you can get the volume up while the technique's coming. That seems like it would be very beneficial.
And that's not a mindset. That's not a way that I always agreed with. I can remember when we first got to Missouri, we were kind of building the program out, and I was of the mind of, we need to, kind of similar to our 7th graders. So I was like, we need to clean every day starting out. We need to learn how to get in these positions. We need to just hammer this. We need to do only this and get really good at it. And then another one of the assistants was, well, why don't we do some box jumps as a supplement to that, so the force output's really high? And I was like, no, if it's not with the bar, because this is going to be our bread and butter thing, we're wasting time. That's energy. Doing 3-4 sets of box squats, that's 3 or 4 extra sets of cleans we can do, more teaching time. Now I'm of the mind of, one, we need to, if you asked me 5 years ago if I would be doing as much loaded jumping as Olympic lifting as we're doing, I would have told you no way. But I'm of the mind now, just seeing the benefits of it, how many variations of things we need to be exposed to, but also not everybody is going to be good at everything right away, but we need results right away. Even in the 7th grade, we need results right away. I need our 7th grade football team and basketball team to beat everybody on the schedule. So I need results right away. So it's like short and long-term investing. Our Olympic lifting is a long-term investment, but we're still doing trap bar jumps and seated jumps and vertical jumps and all these other different things. The learning curve is a lot less steep on, so they can produce force and be powerful at the same time while they're learning this more intricate thing on the front end. And I do think the loaded jumping benefits the Olympic lifting a lot in the learning curve. I do think when when they are constantly triple extending against an object, it's a lot easier for them to understand in order to move the bar and just say an above the knee hang clean, it's a push. I'm pushing my feet through the floor as hard as possible. Oh, that's like the squat jump we do every day in the warm up with the med ball. And you just see the light bulbs go off in their heads. That's kind of a shift in my mindset, and especially in programming that I didn't always have.
It's amazing how much you change. You drift in and out of an idea and what you finally settle on. From the beginning, you've got it all figured out. And at the end, you look back and you're like, why wasn't I doing this sooner?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know you got a day planned ahead of you and you want to hang out with your wife and your new daughter. So let me ask you this one last question. We left a ton on the table, by the way. One of these days we'll have to revisit it because I got stacks of notes that we didn't even look at, but I'll end with this one and we'll go on. But where was your favorite place to eat in Columbia? I would imagine looking at you, you could put some food away. So where were you headed?
Wow, that's a good question. There was a pool hall. Billiards on Main was really good. That's one of the best burgers I've ever had. That place was good. There was a steakhouse. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. All the coaches would get a gift card to it at the end of the season because it was that kind of, it was a 5-star kind of place. Forgetting the name of it off the top of my head. What is the name of the pizza place?
I was sitting here trying to think of it. I'm going to embarrass myself because I don't remember. Is it Shakespeare or?
Shakespeare's, that's right. Shakespeare's was really good. Billiards is the one that I missed the most. That was a phenomenal burger.
We'll usually hit Jazz up over there. I don't get over there very often. I've had some guys play in the state championship a couple times. So whenever they're over there playing for a state championship, we'll pull into Jazz and pregame there. But
I will say this, that Columbia's got a lot of good things going for it, but it had nothing on Lawrence, Kansas.
Dang it. You can't come on and say that. I'm in Missouri.
Lawrence, Kansas is the single greatest, because I've lived in quite a few places. Lawrence, Kansas was the best collection of food of anywhere I've lived, hands down.
Yeah, I can see that. You're not very far from Kansas City, so you get a really wide base of cultures and food coming together. As much as it would pain me to say that, I can see that. Well, Coach, this was amazing. It was way more than I ever thought it could have been. I appreciate your time, and you scheduled around a newborn. All of that stuff to make this happen is really appreciated. So thank you.
Yep, no problem, man. Glad to be on.
Well, you have a wonderful day.
You too.
Hey!